But today, I'm going to present my work. I belong to the World Economy subprogram, so PhD in economics, but my dissertation, and this is one of the chapters and consequential paper out of it, deals with more of a political science side of it. The fancy title is really about shifts, um, ideological shifts and shifts in positions on certain policies by populist parties in Lithuania and Hungary. So the, you know, what is this adopting zigzagging or staying put is basically you either shift your position, uh, you stay put, you don't move, or zigzag between elections. Try to pander around, gather as much support, particular issues, and so on. All right, so let's start. So when talking about the rise of populism in Europe, the demand side is thoroughly discussed in the literature, and there are at least two main arguments why people vote for populist parties. One is the economic insecurity, aggravated especially at the time of economic crisis. And the second is cultural backlash. So beyond going beyond the shifts in values, it's also about anti-immigrant sentiments, again, fueled by refugee crisis in Europe since 2015. So the logic behind my work is that, well, on the demand side, if we see the shift in median voter, what happens on the supply side? If we assume that the linkage between parties and voters holds, and political parties, in order to maximize their potential and their votes, kind of listen to their mean voter, then on the supply side of populism, political parties should adapt, or at least they should adapt their positions to exogenous shocks of economic and refugee crisis. So I have two aims. I will present my rather conceptual framework, rather theory, and I will test it on the comparative example of Lithuania and Hungary. So why shift positions? By shifting positions, I mean uh, shifting positions between elections and before elections, which are found in political manifestos, mainly political manifestos of parties. So why would a party shift its position? Literature talks about some of the reasons. One that I've mentioned already, that the party wants to be closer to the shift of mean voter, and that gets the cues from themselves. So if the mean voter shifts to the right for whatever reason, parties would shift as well. It also depends on the type of party. So leadership parties would, follow the leader, and so the kind of the leadership structure is more or less vertical. The shift would come from above. With activist dominated, it's more bottom and top approach, and will be rather more sensitive to the mean voter shifts. It also depends on what type of a party you are. If you're a niche party and you try to capitalize on a couple of issues, then maybe the cost benefit analysis would tend more to the cost side of things. If you switch your position, you might kind of lose your core supporters, when the mainstream party might allow more itself to move around. Also, literature talks about party system and the competition over issue ownership, as well as the success of far right, and so on. We'll talk about it a bit later. Looking back at previous elections matter as well as the external shocks. What I would like to add is a theory from international trade on the product life cycle theory. So the theory is about, when you try to enter a market, you bring your product, and in order for sales to increase, it has to go through stages. First, it's introduction, then it's the popularity goes up, it reaches a certain point, matures, and then sales decrease. If we talk about political entrepreneurs and parties that try to quote unquote their product by providing this policy solutions or programmatic manifestos, shifting one's position might actually reset this product life cycle. And although it's also costly, but probably not as play as complete rebranding of itself. On the consequences side, of why party would shift the position, they basically lost or win at the election. So you either lose or you gain more votes. And the shift and the literature on the consequences side is scarcer. And what it says is that the parties actually benefit more if they shift on pragmatic economic policy that rather than value cultural domain issues. All right, so this is my conceptual framework, theoretical framework. So on the left-hand side, I have voters. On the right-hand side, I have parties. In between, I have this voter party linkage, right? And on the left-hand side, I have at least two issues that have become salient in recent years. First is welfare, with the rise of economic insecurity and inequality in 2008. The second is immigration. So if those issues translate to the parties, they decide on a positional shift, conducting this cost-benefit analysis, which leads either to electoral success or failure. At the same time, they might look back at the results of previous elections, which also can boost another positional shift, or maybe decide to stay put because they did pretty well. And those two, I'd like to introduce those two variables, which are mediating variables. So electoral institutions, by that I mean electoral system, as well as the additional rules and regulations connected with elections. And party system, by that I mean mostly competition, but also fragmentation of the party system. Comparative case study, Lithuania and Hungary. Why those two countries? Well, if we focus on Central and Eastern Europe, you can see that in the region, you have one of the most resilient populist parties, some of whom have gone through a challenger and the establishment, small party to mainstream. So they've been in government multiple occasions. Some of them are also closer to the logical center, and most of them have gone through this visible positional shifts. While Lithuania and Hungary, again, because those countries have tripolar party competition with conservatives, liberals, and social democratic candidates to various extent at different points of time, but one are more popular than the others, but the tri-party competition is there. Both countries have also started, both parties started from initial conditions that were quite similar, post-socialist experience, EU membership, and so on, but you have divergent paths. While in Hungary with Fidesz, you have quite successful party with visible positional shifts. With Darbo Party, with Labour Party, that I'm going to discuss a bit later, in Lithuania, it's less successful. And this is also a story of two victors. So Viktor Orban in Hungary and Viktor Uspaskich in Lithuania. My hypotheses relate to both the conceptual framework and the success of populist parties. And what I hypothesize is that while parties are in government, especially, they take up extreme positions rather than moderate their positions in order to stay in power, which is contrary to what we find in literature. And hypothesis number two, hypothesis number three, the second one is related to the mediating effect of the two variables, which are electoral institutions and party system. And the third one is about two diverging outcomes of Hungary and Lithuania, with Hungary attempting to turn political democracy into competitive authoritarianism through directly affecting electoral institutions, while in Lithuania you have less so. All right, so for the Hungarian example, it is much more mediatized than Lithuanian one. I propose to look at three distinct shifts by Fidesz, which at the very beginning was a very anti-communist party, liberal. It entered the parliament for the first time in the 1990s, scoring 6%. However, in the next elections, which were quite disappointing for them, right? So looking back at the previous elections, and also because of the growing competition, was a very highly fragmented political system after the 90s, they shift to the center. on one hand, crowning out MDF, which was a successful conservative party at that time. Some of the members from MDF also joined Fidesz, while uh, a lot of liberal politicians left Fidesz for other parties. And so they started to move closer to the center, added the civic party part to its name, and modified their positions. They also made their political program less liberal and more closer to the center, kind of increasing government spending and values, advocating for values which are closer to the political center. This also was done under a mixed electoral system, with half of the deputies elected by the proportionate method, half of the majoritarian system, and the system agreed after roundtable talks of the transition from the socialism in the late 80s. The second shift, something's right. So the second shift, what I suggest is getting closer to the civil society and actually converting civil society. So while Fidesz spent two terms in the position, they kind of waited out on the economic crisis and also on a political crisis in Hungary, which were the leaked MSP conversations, which kind of produced this anti-party sentiment in Hungary and low voter turnout. So during that time, Fidesz invested in its in getting closer to civil society. So they organized civil circles movement, which was not only a conservative ideological newsletter, but a whole movement which involved a lot of events involving local organizations, church leaders, and just aiming at the general conservative middle class. During that time, they not only managed to convert conservative, educated middle class of Hungarian, mostly cities, into its followers, but also kind of dislodged liberals on one side, with socialists, former socialists on the other. And at that time, they've been able to transform itself from a challenger to catch all kind of People's Party, appealing to values, value interest mostly. All right, there is something. Okay, so this is one of the graphs I have. So it comes from Chapel Hill survey. On left-hand side, I have immigration. On the right-hand side, I have economic and left-hand positions of parties from 2010 to 2019. So the higher you go on immigration, the tougher the party is on immigration. The more to the right you go on economic left position, the more right the economic positions of a party is. What's important is Jobbik, which will be also discussed today a bit later, which is the issue owner on everything anti-immigrant and all the xenophobic sentiments. So from 2010, you can see that Jobbik is the issue owner of anti-immigration, but by 2019, slowly but surely, Fidesz actually overtakes it. So Fidesz becomes the new kind of far right by taking over the success of a far right competitor. The third shift, you're mostly aware of it. I think all of you are acquainted with what is happening right now. So during that time, they also, Fidesz, while having the constitutional majority, they've changed the constitution, but they also changed the electoral rules. So the rules, the system is in essence is the same, so half more or less, but it overcompensates the winner. So whoever gets the most votes gets overly compensated with the seats. So you have vote share and then seat share from 2000 to 2020, and as you can see, there is a mismatch between how much they got. So Fidesz actually scored lower in the elections 2014, but they've been compensated, overly compensated with the electoral system, the rules, the additional rules and modifications of the electoral system that they've implemented. All right, the second example is in Lithuania. Is a Darbo Partija, is a Labor Party, which by its name signals center leftist ideological stance. However, it's really hard pinpoint what kind of party it is based on the ideology. So its chairman is Viktor Uspaskich, who is a Russian-born businessman. He's also quite famous for his TV show appearances, antics, and so on. And there's also an event happening almost every year in one of its cities of strongholds of the party, where it's called the Reign of Ice Cream, when him or one of his colleagues from the party get up on a helicopter and throw around ice cream or coupons for ice cream around the city for people to celebrate. So what happened in Lithuania is a Labour Party got into the parliament and consequently got into the government at the earthquake election in 2014 on the wave of impeachment of the newly elected president on a record low turnout with a very simple and straightforward message with a minimum wage, pensions, and social benefits. So in a sense, Labour Party, in terms of populism, it's populist in economic sense, right? So it tends to over promise on things that is almost impossible to deliver. So it started as an anti-establishment challenger party in 2004. It got into the parliament and it was elected under mixed parallel system at that time. However, unlike in Fidesz, when while in position, they were able to get closer to its consistencies and kind of reestablish this party voter link. In Lithuania with Darbo Partija, what happened is the corruption scandals kind of prevented it from doing so. So it was under accusations of illicit party financing, but then crisis came. Lithuania narrowly escaped Latvia's fate of having to obtain a loan from the IMF, so it was highly affected. The rise of anti-austerity sentiments were there, and the Labour Party got back to the government coalition. What happened there is a very similar story to Fidesz. So we have again two dimensions. We have another kind of Tvarka ir Teisingumas is a law and order party, which is a Lithuanian version of Jobbik, and we have a Labour Party. By the year 2019, they also converge. Labour Party doesn't overtake the law and order on the issue ownership, but definitely goes higher than the average that was always been below. It's also in 2019, but the peak of anti-immigration sentiment came around the campaign of 2016. So you have a new chairman telling people to stop looking at refugees through pink glasses. Here he shows the Sun newspaper to one of the promotion videos, and here they have a red tape and saying that we will stop the inflow of refugees. However, the reality was different. They bet on the wrong horse because in reality, refugees didn't really come to Lithuania. Right. Another part of it is again the mediating effect of electoral system. In 2016, Darbo Partija got less than 5%. However, it got a couple, 2 or 3 MPs into the government because of the electoral party system, because some of its members were able to get to the parliament based on the single district list. All right, in conclusion, I have the last minute, just a really short conclusion. In conclusion, when we talk about shifts, you can clearly see two distinct points in terms of immigration. So you have a clear shift in the Labour Party in Lithuania and some zigzagging between on the economic dimension. With Fidesz, the shift here is not visible, but because it happened before, but you have two clear positions as well. So less movement on economic dimension, but much more so in the immigrant. In terms of discussions, again, this means that when populists become dominant mainstream parties that do not moderate their position in order to to concentrate and get closer to the center, they do the opposite, take up extreme positions on immigration because of the success of the far right parties, niche parties, and party board linkage is one of the key issues to discuss in order to understand why you have difference in outcome, the electoral system as well. So again, the shifts are kind of the new wine in the same bottle. So it's the same party with a different view, which is still costly, but probably not that costly as rebranding of the party itself. All right, so that's it from me. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to all the questions and discussion.